I always wanted to be in a Sergio Leone movie, and now I feel almost like I have been with that intro. Thanks, Watcher. I appreciate that. That's good stuff. That's good stuff. Good evening. Welcome to the Privy Council. And we hope that you're on board to share our thoughts with over the next hour and a half or so. And we're going to dive into our understanding of what went down in the last 3 days in Moscow. Besides a 4.5-hour, 7-course meal the first night, Monday night. As you can see, the Privy Council was sort of surreptitiously in the background. Well, not quite surreptitiously, but we were there, and we'll fill you in with our thoughts on this summit that is meant to change the world order. At least that's what Xi thinks it's going to do. Let me get good tidings from the crew. Joe, I need an update from you. We haven't talked in 3 hours.
In hours.
yeah. So,
well, in that time, we've.
I like your Magnum PI shirt, though. I think that's pretty good.
You like it? You like it?
Yeah.
I should just bush out the mustache and just go full Ron Moeller with it, but I'm not. So in the time since we talked, there's been a trip to Michael's, of all places, and then a Bible study has been ran, and here we are. So
very good, very good, very good. Max, welcome back. We're glad to see you, and
thanks.
We hope to share in your wisdom of all things Chinese as we move our conversation through this. And what's new? Any crazy stuff in your neighborhood? I like when you come on and tell us about what your crazy neighbors are doing down in your neck of the woods. Any stories to recount to us at this point, or have things sort of calmed down?
Yeah, I'm not. I'm not going to say anything.
Okay.
Just
property values and all. You just
property values. You know, I kind of want to get this property on the market and find somebody to take it off my hands without too much trouble. But yeah, every day is an adventure when you live in adventure land. So it's all good though. I'm glad to see you guys are doing well, and you're hitting all the nails on the head here. I was particularly surprised by a lot of the ISW Kagan death cult cheerleading that came after this summit between Putin and Xi, and I too was wondering, wait a minute, I mean, where are these people, the Kagan death cult getting this idea that summit was a failure? How do they even know what was going on there? I mean, normally it's 2 to 3 days before stuff starts leaking out and official statements start getting made. And like you may have mentioned earlier, it's like, well, who's to say that the Russians and the Chinese want to feed the U.S. 24-hour news cycle? There's a lot of questions I have that I think we're going to discuss really on the show. Yeah,
that really is sort of central to this conversation, which is producers at MSNBC and CNN are pulling their hair out because they didn't get the data drop that they normally get from KJP and John Kirby. So, and I think part of the message is we don't owe you anything. You enemy, no friend, you enemy, right? So I think it'll be interesting. We get to engage in a little Kremlinology, sort of a lost art of the past. Some of us lived through, and a little Sinology, which some of us are still living through. So we're gonna read some tea leaves today in terms of what went down in Moscow, and both pros and cons from a couple different perspectives, and we'll see how people feel about it at the end. And we have the Baofeng Whisperer with us tonight. Matt?
I am here.
Yeah.
I am here.
Yeah. Are you like number one on any other book list that I need to know about, or can I just assume that all is well?
Not that I'm aware of. It's still number one bestseller in.
I think you could sit in the crapper with a roll of toilet paper and scribble some stuff on there, and fling it out, and you'd be number one on Amazon at this point. I don't know.
Man, it's a big honor. though. It really is. I mean, we can joke about it, but released another book,
Well, I intend to joke
which
about it
is
for a while. So
yeah, and, released another book, which was kind of a anthology of sorts, a collection of stuff I've written over the
hey,
years.
wait,
Stuff
whoa. For those
reviews.
of you in the chat that don't know what an anthology is, it's shit that
No,
I wrote before that nobody paid attention to, but now that I'm a big deal, you'll pay attention to it. Am I about right on that? Huh?
kinda,
Yeah, okay. I
kinda.
just yeah.
But I mean, it's a collection of articles that I've written over the years, and other people have written as well, that contributed to me.
Well,
And
your
first
plagiarism is
volume of
remarkable.
that's out, the Guerrilla Dispatch, and the second volume is about to come out on April 1st. I've been wrapping up the editing of that, and there's a significant amount of original content in there as well, in the second volume. So it's
Huh.
about 50-50. And so
So
it's
you're
some
saying if I
articles.
actually want to contribute to number 2, I need to hurry up? Is that what you're telling me?
Uh,
Maybe too
well, I'm not
late.
going to tell you to hurry up. Volume 3 will be out the first week of May. I've already got much of the content for Volume 3 lined up as well.
There we go. All right.
And outlined. So it's. I'm also still banging away at the Signals Intelligence Handbook, and I've got a couple of other projects in the works. But the big announcement, though, is the store, the online web store, which was kind of a thorn in my side for a while, is up and running, has been selling like crazy, and I've got some new products that are up there as well. So
I'm really happy for you. That's all good stuff.
thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, that's good stuff. All right, James. I see that you're no longer a piece of tuna. You're something else.
Another protein source.
Yeah,
More, more.
share with us your iconographic nature there. What
It's just more attuned to the Central Asian theme today. So
I thought you were making fun of my plans to raise sheep in Montana with Basque sheep herders. So.
no shit. I'll come up.
Central Asia, sheep are sheep, or men are men, and sheep are nervous.
That's it. From Xinjiang all the way down to Baku. So
those sheep are too clean to be in Central Asia.
and they're not fat tail. So yeah.
Facts.
It'll be interesting. No, it's going to be an interesting show. I'm looking forward to it. A lot going on, and just kind of watching the relevance of American policy collapse at an incredible rate, sort of like a Chinese balloon getting hit by an AIM-9.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. I just, we're, the whining is not becoming.
Well, it's because it doesn't fit their policy.
It doesn't. Mike, we have some update on what you're doing. Are you still getting skiing in out there, or is it all?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I went today. Blue skies. What do they call it? Blue something. Just gorgeous in the morning. Completely just not a cloud in the sky. The only problem with that is hasn't snowed in a week, so the slope itself is fairly icy. But I did fire up. My brother bought me one of those really fancy cameras, rather than just a cell phone.
Right.
So I took some. I think I came out pretty good, pretty nice pictures.
Well, we'll look forward to seeing those on the website before too much.
And it seems I'm surrounded by prolific writers. Now, maybe I use the word anthology incorrectly, but my anthology was a compilation of books 1, 2, and 3. Volume 1 was books 1, 2, and 3. Volume 2 was books 4, 5, 6. That's what I called an anthology. So I don't know if I fucked up or not.
Yeah. So rather than stuff that nobody read, you're just retreading stuff that people have already read and
just packaging into one big blob.
I admire the initiative. I really do. I think that's.
You said you're going to write a book. We're going to hold you to it.
Yeah, you know what?
Nonsense.
My book got blown up because we became enemies with the Chinese. So I got to recalibrate. I got to fall back and recalibrate. And I keep giving ideas to Sibley, and I don't know if he's included them or not because we have no idea that the sequel's actually done. We just been told that it's been done.
He says it's done.
But I think there must be, Carmelite monks or something that are transcribing it for publication. So until we see it, it doesn't exist as far as I'm concerned.
So is the Dutchie buying a PC-12 or just getting an old PC-6?
Oh no, I have
Very
got
cool aircraft.
I have lust for the PC-12. I really do. I'm scouring different websites and stuff like that.
Look at the
I
PC.
know enough.
Look
I
at
know
the
enough about.
PC-6s.
I know about those things, and I know about these big ticket items. It's better to not buy one brand new, because it's why and so, but I think for our purposes it's perfect. And
So I've got two friends who've got PC-12s. They're exceptional airplanes.
well, doesn't Jimmy have a 12?
No, there are a bunch of people here who have them.
Yeah,
They're a great airplane. If from the East Coast, this mid coast point, you can do Bermuda, you can do Bahamas, you can in single runs, and Transcon you got to do one stop.
yeah, and the logistics of getting to Moscow for the summit were tough. We borrowed one. We had to take the polar route, to get from Flathead Lake to Moscow. But
I still maintain that we should have just taken that converted PBY Catalina Lancier. I think that would have been a much nicer trip. But
well, yeah,
Slow,
it would have been. And if you have to put it down someplace that's liquid, it works.
Baikal.
Yeah, no, Baikal's not on the route. But anyhow, Matt, I've already talked to you. Is Watcher moving people around? You trying to just make sure I'm paying attention here?
he ducked out, and I had to scoop him back in.
All right. Watcher, new news on your front is you've quit smoking, right?
Correct. And I've also got a
Bravo.
business line all of a sudden, and I just got a quote on business insurance. I feel like a real adult.
And did you take our collective advice and incorporate your new business? Or
I looked into it. I've been advised to wait about a month until I've established my relationships with.
That's right.
Yeah, basically until I've established my relationships with all my vendors, and then I can essentially just turn around and say, "Hey, here's the new number."
Very good. Very good. I think you're in good hands. We'll leave it at that. Let's dive in. I don't know what to call this summit. We tend to come up with names from time to time. I think this is just Xi-Putin, 3 days. Actually, it turned out to be like 2.5 days. And I think a lot of people around the world were watching this to see sort of what was going to come out of it. I'll share with the viewers that there's not been a tremendous amount of hard news that's come out of it. A lot of thematics, and we'll talk about that. And we'll talk about the reason why that producers at MSNBC and CNN did not get detailed lists and press releases of what was going on in this summit. But I can assure you it was of substance and consequential in its outcome. So let's move. We're going to spend a lot of time on this slide just because I think these are the issues that we need to care about as it relates to this. And I think in answering these, we'll answer what came out of this summit, other than my new favorite mural on the wall there. We'll answer what came out of this summit to the degree that you can judge whether you think this was a success from a Russian perspective, a success from a Chinese perspective, and whether the sheep in the State Department are nervous as a result of this summit. And so let's put this in Xi's words. And there's a premise here that I want to put forth because I think it's accurate, and we'll start with that, and people can comment as they see fit on that first topic first. And that is, I think what this summit did is it clearly established the hierarchy of primacy in this relationship. And that is, Xi is number one and Putin is number two at this particular point. I don't know that that's going to change anytime soon, but it was made clear, and I have to give the Chinese diplomatic corps real props for the run up to this summit and positioning Xi as the new ascendant sort of global diplomatic power. We've talked last week, I think it was, or last time out, about the Saudi-Iran rapprochement to a degree that was really sort of a big occasion. And we talked about that earlier today on CFC, Council for Future Conflict, and that is a big deal. And they have made a series of sort of steps to position Xi as the dominant political and diplomatic force on the planet in the context of not just Ukraine, but in the context of other things, as we'll see. But I think they want to make a real effort at trying to bring a ceasefire to bear as it relates to Ukraine for a variety of reasons. Let me just poll the panel here. You don't all have to respond, but if you have a view, I mean, does anybody quarrel with the notion that Xi is the senior partner in Xi and Putin LLC or LLP for that matter?
Yeah, I think so. I think his actions afterward kind of point that direction, right?
Yeah, we'll get into that. That was interesting. Max, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think in this case that she is, wearing the pants in the family here, and a lot of that's due to the resources he can bring to Russia at a time when Putin really needs a little shot in the arm. I mean, I'm not saying, MSNBC news flash kind of, oh my God, the Russian army is running out of munitions, because it's not. But Russia could really use China's industrial capacity, its material, war material, and shipbuilding and plane building, and all the industrial capacity that China has, and that could put Russia in a position where it's really in the power seat in any type of negotiations in the future. And I kind of think that's what this whole meeting is about. I mean, she meets with Putin, they kind of stay mum. And I think if you're reading between the lines, she's saying, hey, listen, I gave you guys a 12-point peace plan. You're not talking peace. I've got this massive industrial capacity that I'm throwing towards Russia. And once I do that, then, I mean, you're going to come to us begging for peace negotiations, not the way it is right now.
Well, I think Max has just stolen the thunder out of the Xi-Zelensky phone call. I think that was an apt summary of what he's likely to say.
I didn't mean to get too far ahead.
No. I think that's wonderful, because I think that's exactly what he's going to say to Zelensky, and that is, you can hitch your star to Joe Biden, who's got problems on a number of fronts, not least of which is he's trying to get a budget passed that the Republicans don't want to spend as much money as he does, certainly not on Ukraine, or at least some of the Republicans. And oh, by the way, their banks are failing, and they're up against the debt ceiling. So we don't have any of those issues in China. So if you want to measure, you want to measure this out in the context of who's on first and what's on second, and I don't know who's on third. That's an old joke. Let's go. I think that's largely what he's going to say, and I just find it really interesting that I think guys like Jack Keane and others at ISW and other places were looking for lists of materiel. The Chinese decided not to do what we do, which is to say Poland's going to send 4 MiG-29s, and the Czechs are going to send 13 MiG-29s that don't work but are eligible to be used as spare parts, and the Brits are going to send 3 Challenger tanks. I mean, so they're used to being fed all this stuff so that they don't have to do their job. And the Chinese and the Russians just said, "We're not going to tell you anything." And from Xi's perspective, you're right. He's got an industrial base that he needs to utilize coming out of COVID. And the good news is that unlike talking to Sri Lanka or Zambia or the Central African Republic, Putin can pay him for what he does. He's got stuff either in trade or he's got gold or that they produce, and he can pay him for it. So in the allocation of productive capacity within the Chinese economy, I would think that Russia sort of sits in the catbird seat at this point. Jim?
One of the things that that I wanted to bring up is this misconception about the peace plan that Xi Jinping put forward, and we've heard a lot of this talk in ISW and a lot of the other establishmentary analysts, is that they say, oh well, this is one-sided. This supports Russia. It's pro-Russia. It's like, yes, no kidding, it's pro-Russia. Russia and China are in a no limits alliance. I mean, that's the terminology that Xi and Putin use.
Correct.
That's the way negotiations work. I mean, when we negotiated with the Vietnamese in the Vietnam War, Russia was throwing in proposals, I mean, that were pro-Vietnam. I mean, are we, did we forget how this geopolitical like peacemaking thing works? I think it's just humorous that
Yeah.
it seems like Xi and Putin are playing, the big boy game, and we're running around like, 5-year-olds in the kiddie pool splashing around, playing pretend diplomacy.
Well, those of us who are old enough remember how many months did we spend talking with the Vietnamese about the shape of the table in Paris?
Yeah, no kidding.
Right? So
Yeah.
these things take time.
I've heard this. Excuse me. I've heard the same criticism, which is not necessarily invalid from that point of view, right? I mean, it's not like it's not truthful, perhaps, but did we come back with alternatives?
No.
Yeah.
No.
And I mean, if they were going to be critical of, the 12-point whatever it is, okay, fine. But do you have a constructive alternative and a proposal to say, why don't we all get together and hash this shit out?
Well,
I mean, to me, that's kind of an opportunity to at least address this other faction, and see if you can, I don't know, negotiate something. Can you get into the game?
and what and guys, what did we get out of Tony Blinken in response to this? Do you recall?
LGBTQ rights are human rights.
Well,
I mean,
we got that.
I think he may have pissed himself on podium.
But before that, what we got from Tony Blinken was they're trying to keep the Ukrainians from fighting. We want them to keep fighting. We have to, now's the time for the Ukrainians to fight, and we're not gonna countenance any discussion around a ceasefire. We got the more war.
I'm saying things kind of, I guess, rhetorically.
Yeah.
Knowing the end point, but it's discouraging to see that we don't, do something a little more constructive. Even while, I mean, we could, I guess, still prosecute the war to a point that it's going to further our end of the negotiation, sort of thing, right? We could do it simultaneously with actually sitting at the table, because that process has to start, as you were saying, Stan. Months and months and months about the size of the table and whatnot. You got to start somewhere. And I think the point of this whole conversation tonight is there are certainly some very valid other players in the world right now that we need to take into account, and collectively we need to solve this thing, and we should start trying to do that.
Yeah, I have a theory as to why we're not, and I'll put it out there, and you guys can crack away at it if you will. And those of you who follow me on Twitter probably already know this, and that is, I believe that it's the central part of the still not launched re-election campaign of one Joseph Robinette Biden, and that the only way he can win is as a full wartime president. When I say full, that doesn't necessarily mean American troops on the ground, but it might. And I think that being a wartime president is his perceived pathway to a potentially successful re-election campaign, because it allows him to shout down anybody, because it's all about the war. And he's got nothing else to run on other than, I got to finish the war that we were pushed into by the Russians in collusion with Donald Trump, which will be the end line in all those discussions.
Right.
And I think that's what they got. They got a pair of twos. and a lot more Ukrainians are going to have to die to try to get Joe Biden reelected, in my view. And that is that's I started to use the word despicable. I think I will. It's shameful, I guess, is a more diplomatic term. It's shameful on a number of levels, but I do seriously believe that's what's going on at this point.
Some of you may die, but that's a sacrifice I am willing to make.
I'm willing to make. And in the meantime, I clipped 10% off the top. So thank you for your. We were about to die. Salute you, as I think was the line, right? So we shall see how that works. I mean, I can't explain it any other way. I don't know what he thinks he's going to do in this context, other than he can't run on Afghanistan. He can't run. Increasingly, he's not going to be in a position to run on the economy, because I think the economy is at an inflection point. We won't go into all that in detail because that's a show in its own right. But I think we're gonna vomit jobs in this economy in the second half of 2023. The bank thing is part of it. Other things are part of it. And so I think the only thing he's got left is the premise that, we're all brothers with Ukraine and we all have to fight for democracy. And I'm the guy.
That's Russia. The Russia-China alliance is a significant threat to, to America and to the West. I'm not so much worried about the West. I mean, Europe lost its democracy a long time ago, but to Americans' way of life, the China-Russia alliance poses a significant, almost existential threat to the U.S. And we have Biden and his foreign policy team not taking this threat serious. And they seem to be stumbling along, playing pretend and looking the other way and trying to kind of do that Karl Rove thing where they create their own reality. But I'm telling you, on the other side of of that locked door is that China-Russia alliance, and they are getting their stuff together, getting ready to basically push the U.S. off the geopolitical stage. And whether they do that or not, it really doesn't matter. They can do a significant amount of damage to an economy, a U.S. economy that's already damaged, and really put some stress on just everyday average American citizens' quality of life. This is a situation that we should expect more from the leaders in Washington. We need to curb this. I mean, we spent all this time, decades and decades in the Cold War, trying to keep China and Russia apart. And here we have Washington, D.C. foreign policy blob is uniting them and giving them all the ammunition they need to basically push the U.S., out of its dominant position in global politics.
Yeah, Max, I would build on that for a minute, and I'd like the panel's thoughts on this. And that is, I don't think that the United States has ever faced a potential conflict like this. And the reason I say that is because, as you say, the Chinese and the Russians on a combined basis, I'll call it, you may disagree, some of you, but that's peer-to-peer from a military perspective, largely. And certainly the higher up the chain you go in terms of sophistication of weapons, by that I'm alluding to nuclear, it probably is peer-to-peer from that perspective. But the other piece of this that is lost in many people's calculus is the economic interdependency between us and China. And we didn't face that with the Soviet Union because we weren't interdependent economically. The Soviet Union didn't own $1 trillion worth of our treasury notes, and didn't supply, 40% of our GDP in the way of trade goods. We didn't face that with Germany. We didn't face it with Japan. We certainly didn't face it in World War I, and everybody else from that point forward was a rounding error from that perspective. And I don't think that our governing betters have really, they may have thought about it, but they haven't spoken to the American people about what the context of a broader sort of engagement with this now alliance, and I'll call it that, between the Russians and the Chinese, what that means in the context of true kinetic involvement with them, kinetic and economic involvement with them, both in terms of the price of oil and the stuff that we all depend on from Amazon and Walmart and the other aspects of this. I don't think anybody's done the calculus or at least made it public as to what that means for the American public, because it's pretty difficult. So we shall see. I hope it doesn't come to that. I really do, but I hope it doesn't come to that. Jim, I had asked you to comment. I'm going to come back to you and ask you to weigh in on matters Chinese or Russian, as you choose.
Well, I think this action has been in the Chinese plan for a long time. And I think it was very much part of what Xi's been doing over the last decade. And it is clear to them that it's now the time to assert themselves and their primacy, at a minimum in Eurasia as the continental power. And I think the presence of all of the states of Central Asia at this meeting was kind of a signal that all of this is ours now, and we're going to realign. And I think that now that Xi has locked his win domestically, and he's going to take advantage of it globally, because it's now him. He's doing it. And he doesn't need anybody to say yes or no anymore. He's just going to do it. And he's delivering the China dream that he talked about 5-10 years ago. And that's, Han presence and control and leadership of the global economy. They're going to rewrite the rules. They're going to take it back 100 years, as he said to Vladimir Putin, and listen to the words. And the response of the media was pretty interesting, because they're used to the Chinese telling us to keep us informed enough. The complete void of news, we're not relevant to what they're doing now. We're on the outside of that box. So they've completely severed their feelings of responsibility for bringing us along and keeping us informed. They're just going to do what they do. And I think an interesting little tell from the Russians was about an hour ago, there was a release that no more drones are going to be allowed in the Black Sea, because of the attacks on Crimea and the ports. So that includes American drones, and they've taken one. I think they're going to take more. So I think they're done dealing with our legalistic irritation, and they're going to see who gets on side with them. So this is going to be a global competition of selling your system. And I don't think we're in a good position to do that. I don't think we understand what's at risk.
No, I think we're still operating under the hubris that because we're Americans and we say something, that people are going to necessarily respond to that in an attractive way, even though, as you and I have discussed on this show and others quite a bit, we seem to make it very difficult for people to raise their hand and get on board, and go from there. Mike, further thoughts from your end, please?
Hold on a second. Well, I actually wanted to stick.
The floor is yours. Take it anywhere you want to go.
The slide deck you have, and something caught my eye. If you look at your slide deck and it has the Roman numeral 7, what was the interpretation of the meaning by the U.S. and its dependents? And I just took one little thing.
Notice I didn't say allies.
Yeah. So I'll just quote. This is from the Xi, his press release, I guess. So Xi says, our two sides have had close coordination on the international stage and fulfilled our responsibilities as major countries. So I just kind of making a little notes to myself, and I said, well, if China is a major country, why are they still being treated as a developing country in the WTO and get the breaks and advantages in trade from that? And I'm getting to a point in a second.
No, I know. I see where you're going. Go ahead.
And I think the next line in that same blob of writing said something like, China and Russia are firmly committed to safeguarding the UN-centered international system, the international order underpinned by international law. And my thought was, why then is China committing genocide to the Uyghurs and possibly Tibetans? And why do why do they tolerate what amounts to child slavery in DRC, where they are mining cobalt? And the basic theme of all that stuff I just said was, if you believe everything that they said, I've got a bridge to sell you, connecting over to Brooklyn or whatever. So it's a very good summit from the point of view, and your slide says, change is coming. There's no doubt that these guys are jostling for the top slot, no doubt at all. And as long as Joe Biden is willing to call China competition, he sees them as competition, particularly after this meeting and the things that are being said. I'd have to say, hey, man, it's time to wake the fuck up. They've gone beyond that. They've gone beyond that stage of being just, competition. And we need to look at this a whole lot different. And that might be concede that entire part of the world, we got nothing. We need to get the fuck out of that part of the world, because they're there and we're way over here. And, I'm not saying that's the way to go, but they really need to start looking at courses of action on how to deal with this in a kind of a united front, and figure it out. We're going to ally ourselves with Europe. Well, Europe's got nothing. They got nothing. So who gives a crap? Let them go. We got this whole hemisphere over here, maybe. Well, that's a different story. So I would think that this particular meeting would open up some thinkers to kind of look at this and say, okay, how are we going to address this? Because this is a big deal. They have staked a claim to the world, and they did it very well. I poked at a couple things he said, and I don't believe that shit. But hey, we have to address it and look at it and say, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to handle this? And maybe we are. We're not aware of it because it's behind closed doors, and that's fine. I'm dubious to that. I would welcome it, but I'd be dubious to it.
Hey, Jim, do you want to do this? Or do you want me to do it? And that is to tell the tale of how we all fell in love with the notion that if we just brought China along into the, I'll use the term League of Nations or the family of nations, and we incentivized their behavior by doing carve-outs and special development credits from the World Bank and yada, 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 they were going to be just like us.
It's a common problem.
And do we not have, at last I looked, David Malpass is the president of the World Bank. He could shut down the special drawing rights that the Chinese still have to fund development activities in rural China. They don't need that any longer. I would think that there's a majority of folks at the World Trade Organization, if they weren't dependent upon Chinese trade, that could level the playing field. Trump tried to do that. He got pilloried for it. Could level the playing field from a trade perspective with China. I mean, it's not up to them. I mean, if you give me a good deal and you're going to sell me cows for a third of what they cost, I'm not going to at some point say, you know, Jim, I'm rich enough. I'll just pay you full price for your cows or your sheep, as the picture portrays. Why aren't we doing those things to level the
Yeah,
playing field?
and I guess it was,
We don't have it in us.
possibly it was. I don't even know why. They got those concessions, back in 2000, but it's 23 years later. Obviously, things have changed dramatically, and our policies should also change dramatically with that new data, right? I mean, that's all I'm saying is this. There's a whole ton of things that should have been a wake-up call, which apparently did not. But this summit certainly should be a wake-up call, and people should start getting busy, put their little thinking caps on, and start figuring out our next 20 years.
Well,
I think
I'll give you some. Go ahead, Jim. Go ahead.
no, I think Mike's making a really good point, which is this is no longer about China or Russia. This is about what the United States wants to do, will do, what we're capable of doing, because we've really screwed the pooch on our assumption base the last 30 years. Right?
And before we get too far, what are we going to do? One of the things we might do, and I already said it, but is divestiture. We might divest ourselves of these burdensome relationships that do nothing for us, and kind of focus on ourselves, and fix our own shit that's $31 trillion in debt, yada yada yada. There's a lot of things. Like I said, I mean, I've thrown out a couple things. I mean, there's a whole spectrum, and what is the most wise course of action to pursue? I don't really know, but this really should kind of start a process of doing something different, if nothing else.
See, but the guy who occupies the White House ran on and has tried to actuate the notion of all of the policy that got us to where we are. You will recall him saying, "We're back. We, the United States, we're back. We're fully engaged with all of our allies and our adversaries, and we're running the playbook from Bush 41 on."
We're not a serious player in the minds of the Chinese and Russians now. We're just a military competitor who has the ability to do damage. They see us as a difficult child now, and I think they're gonna do the easy part now,
Yeah,
which
and
is Eurasia
every
and the Middle East.
and everything that we do from a diplomatic perspective just reinforces that view in their minds and the minds of those non-aligned nations, everybody in what I'll call the Southern Hemisphere, because they look at it and say, why? So somebody alluded to this. John Kirby stands up and says, we're basically, I'm paraphrasing it, saying we're building a gay empire. That's a core piece of our foreign policy, is a gay empire, right? And if I'm Pakistani or I'm Saudi or I'm, any other sort of religion that doesn't countenance to that, if you guys want me to teach about transgenderism in school, okay, give me the money, and we won't do it, but we'll take the money from you and laugh all the way to the bank.
You see, it reinforces the concept that the United States has just become silly, right? I mean, to put it in positive terms, we're just silly now. And so when they go to their population, they don't even need to insult us. They don't even need to engage us. They disregard us now. And I think that's where we are.
Well, the example I like to use is one that's pretty linear and it's easy to understand. And that is, if you want to compare who's become the meritocracy and who hasn't, okay, I think that the respective spokesman for both the Russian government and the U.S. government is a great example of one is a meritocracy and the other is a DEI box checking exercise. And that is Maria Zakharova, who is the press secretary for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Russia. I would not want to get into an argument with that woman because she could basically out-argue me in about 5 languages. Okay.
That's the secret is the 5 cultural windows they can juggle.
And her reason for being there is she's really good at her job. We have a press secretary of the White House who's there because she checks a number of boxes. She's Haitian, she's a lesbian, she's a woman, and I can keep going. I don't know what else it is, but those
married
are
to Suzanne Malveaux, who's a
married to another woman,
powerful media,
and so those are her qualifications for the job. We used to make fun of countries who put people like that in positions of power. We, the United States, I know I individually did as well, and now we've become that. We're a little far afield as it relates to the summit, but I think that gives you some perspective in terms of how we're viewed and the notion that I'll tell you what, let's jump the gun on this, Watcher. If you can pull up that link to the Bloomberg article with Tony Blinken and Lindsey Graham, I think that rounds this out, and then we can come back to the summit.
Hey, while he's doing that, I just want to point out one thing here. And remember, she kicked off that global security initiative about 6-8 months ago. Everyone was like, what is this global security initiative about? It was a little bit cloudy, and then it started leaking out. And it basically is the founding document of this peace plan, this Ukraine peace plan. But why did Xi Jinping decide to push through with this global security initiative? Because that was him basically putting China's stake in the ground and saying, we are going to run the world from here on out. And if you want prosperity, if you want development, if you want to be serious, if you don't want gender studies pushed on you and your children mutilated for some trans cause or whatever, then you need to come with us. And at the time, I don't think anyone in the US really understood the magnitude of that global security initiative.
No.
And so I just wanted to throw that out there and say, hey, who was it that was it old Hong Kong that was saying, hey, this is Xi's plan all along, and he's been very patient, kind of pushing this to where it is right now? That's exactly right. I mean, the GSI came out, bam, and now here we are. I mean, this we need to go back and look at some of the stuff that we missed in the establishment as far as what Xi's plans are and in what direction they're going, because we are not in the power seat any longer.
Yeah, the Chinese long game constantly undermines Washington's desire to have 24-month windows of political win and positive news. What we have to understand is we have a competitor who thinks in 100-year blocks and executes in 10-year blocks and 5-year blocks on a 30 or 40-year long plan of being preeminent. And, that's not new. That's just true, right? It's just a very hard sell to somebody who's locked into a congressional power structure or a senatorial power structure. And it's definitely hard from the standpoint of electoral politics across the board in the US. So when you get into a presidential discussion like we have now, nobody wants to talk about the fact that the 30 years they were in the Senate, they were wrong. And nobody on the Intelligence Committee wants to talk about how all this shit that went down in the last 6 years was on their watch. And now they pretend like, oh my God, I had no idea. I had no idea. It's like, well, I'm sorry. You've been on the Intelligence Committee, my senator, on the Intelligence Committee for the last 6 years. What have you been doing, man? Haven't you been getting a briefing from these guys who've been making shit up wholesale? Aren't you in charge of the FISA courts? I mean, you don't get me started on this, but we've got people who live in this parallel reality inside the Beltway who've chosen not to see the seriousness of this. And they've not only made us vulnerable to this by subsidizing the export of all our production capacity, but we can't produce strategic things here now, and we don't want to do anything. The NIMBY power in this country is massive, and it's driven by the party in power. You can't build a power station, you can't build a dam, you can't put a damn tower up without them coming in and saying, can't do that. So this whole argument for infrastructure, none of the money that Biden has put into this $1 trillion infrastructure package is going to do a lick of infrastructure development in this country. It's going to be frittered away on silly, until which time we get more people in charge who are serious. And it's put us at a serious competitive disadvantage. And the neocons played in by being sucked into small events across the last 2 decades that sucked the life out of this country and sucked our treasure out as well. So we're going to have to
let's do this. I mean, we could spend 2 shows on that. Let's just talk about what is the manifestation of that behavior that's developed over the last several years as it relates to our response basically to this summit. So Watcher, if you'll pull that up, I would appreciate it. So this is today in Bloomberg, and Anthony Blinken is on the Hill in front of a senatorial committee. There are 2 people cited in this article, neither of which I hold in high regard. One is Tony Blinken, and the other is Lindsey Graham. And they're having a dialogue about what to do about Russia and China. And Tony Blinken basically calls Russia the acute threat and China the long-term threat, as if somehow Russia is going to resolve itself in the near term. Hold that as off. He's now asking for $63 billion in the budget request, an 18% increase in the State Department's budget in order to deal with all the challenges that we face, including record funding for USAID, which is our mad money that we go out and throw at people. Or if we can, we use that money to stage color revolutions in targeted countries like Georgia and Hungary at this point. And yes, I did say that out loud. And so even Lindsey Graham says, I don't think that's going to fly. But here's something you could do for me, Secretary Blinken, and that is we need to label Russia as a terrorist. And we need to do that, and we need to do it now. Now, those of you who've been in and around the GWAT and in countries where the GWAT has been prosecuted, I think you're aware of, if we label somebody as a terrorist, that sort of gives us carte blanche to operate under existing authorizations of military force. Syria is a great example of that. To do damn near what we want to do, sub rosa, above board, whatever, in the holy grail of fighting terrorism. Max, Mike, anybody else want to speak to that? Is that consistent with your understanding?
It's a declaration of war is essentially what it is.
It is.
It's just
without
that
having to do so.
Yeah. It's just we've been pointing that ray gun at terrorist group, non-state actors, and occasionally we'll smear Iran with it as a state sponsor. But when you call a nuclear power a terrorist organization, you've de facto declared war. That's Graham's off his meds. That's language that we really don't need right now.
Well, no, Graham is playing out the playbook, and that is
that right there is the problem.
Yep.
We're gonna take a square fucking peg, and we're gonna pound it into that round hole, and damn it, that's the way it worked. And again, I'm not the most subtle person in the world, and I don't give a shit. If people think I am or not, but I mean, this guy, just wrong. This is not a subtlety. This warning shot this summit provides. They are declaring world order and who's in charge, or just, we're dismissing you. We don't really give a crap what you think. That's fine. So understand that, but let us not fall into the trap of trying to, hey, we have this AUMF thing we wrote, 22 years ago, and let's make that fit this situation by calling, how about an entire new statute or whatever to address the actual single problem in hand.
But then people have to take a position, Mike.
They
They
have to take a position, and they have to get to fucking work.
Yeah.
And that's what's required. Get your ass to work.
Mike's making a really good point here, Stan. I mean, we talked about the Guild. Lindsey Graham is an Air Force lawyer, right? He's a lawyer, and they will look at their available legal structures and policy structures, and they will, as he said, cram that square peg in. What they don't want to have to do is take a new position or create a new law, legislation
that fits the actual problem.
And they don't want to bring the power base back to the Hill, which is the part I don't understand.
So to make it worse, and I'm strap hanging on what you're saying, Jim. But somewhere in that speech, or maybe something I read elsewhere regarding Xi's concerns that he stated publicly, was something to the effect that Xi was concerned that the NATO expansionism would somehow consume China. I mean, something to that nature. Again,
encroach into Asia was the
again, I mean, if NATO is rolling whatever crap that they have way over into China, based on the original chart of NATO, again, there's a lovely piece of international legislation that needs to be reworked. This entire problem set has nothing to do with NATO.
You see, but NATO is running naval patrols in the Pacific, right? The French have deployed, the Germans have deployed, the Dutch have deployed, the Brits are there. Everybody's been running parallel plan.
And I guess all I'm saying, not really in relation to the election, but it is. If we were the leader in the world, that would be something we would be pursuing, is saying, hey, this NATO construct no longer is sufficient. It is no longer, whatever words you want to use, and we got to do something different.
What are the first two letters in NATO stand for?
Yeah, but see, that's not, because Mike, where that leads you to, if you're one of the Beltway, priests of the guild, the legal guild, and you go off to the temple and you examine the entrails of legislation or executive orders to divine new meaning that can be applied to things that were never even considered at the time that they were drafted. And that is the function of our government today, unfortunately.
I hear you. And we all really violently agree. But
let me finish,
we're going to lose.
What they don't want to do is they don't want to open up this discussion about what is the raison d'etre for NATO today, because they know that there's a substantial number of people in this country who feel as I do, and that is, if we could get out of NATO, I would do it in a heartbeat. I would let the Europeans who've ridden for free for 76 years on our backs defend themselves, pick up the slack in Ukraine, do whatever they want to do. Now, in 2022, 7 of the 30 nations in NATO met their 2% of GDP spending requirement obligation towards their militaries. 7 out of 30. In the context of the great new land war in the continent of Europe.
Exactly. So they go to the minimum order quantity in a year of warfare.
Yeah.
For the first time in decades.
So my question is, they don't want to open the box on NATO because they know the American people are just as likely to try to force them to get out of NATO as anything else, and that cannot do, because it is tearing down the temple that these people all live in.
Yeah, nothing.
You know,
nothing
when
will
I-
survive that
My
kind of
view,
scrutiny.
my view is real simple. You want to draw a 9-dash line somewhere down the middle of the Pacific. And Mike, you made reference to this. China, that's your stuff over there. We're going to take our stuff over here. Europe, you got your stuff over here. Please send our men and material back to us. We're going to deploy them on the southern border, and we're either going to hammer shit Mexico into some sort of notion, or we're going to die trying, because that's our real threat. 100,000 deaths a year from fentanyl, 3 million illegals a year. God knows who they are. And the president of Mexico talking shit to us as recently as yesterday, when he doesn't control 20% of his country.
and you know, it would be to Canada and everything south of Mexico's advantage if they all kind of got on board with this hemisphere, because it's going to be us.
They are
Against
on board. We're
them.
the only outliers on this hemisphere.
We've made it untenable. For
Well, I mean,
their,
part of that is we got to kick China and Russia and Iran out of South America, and we need to take that.
We can't
'Cause if
even
we
deal
don't,
with fucking Cuba.
we're going to have absolutely nothing.
yeah,
We're
it's
going to
going
have
to
no
be
allies of any significance.
That's going to
at
be
all.
a tough one. So I found a couple quotes just poking around today, and so this is Chinese media. Consolidating and developing China-Russia relations is a strategic choice made by China based on its own fundamental interests. And this is the China state media.
Mm.
And this is Xi talking to Putin. Western criticism of the ties were brushed off. The quote is, "It is China's strategic choice and will not change due to a temporary incident." What do you think the temporary incident is?
The ICC
Temporary incident is
or the Ukraine Special Military Operation.
or the US is a temporary incident in the perspective of China.
Well, yeah. China's on year 5,000 right now.
We are
right?
the temporary incident.
Yes.
And I think
Yes.
I think we have got to put ourselves into their context to understand what they plan to do. They will do what they want to do, how they want to do it. They won't ask permission, and they just don't care now because we've just become silly.
Amen.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I
And-
think that's right.
Well, I think when you look at the article that Xi wrote in the Russian newspaper just before the summit,
Yep.
Right.
he mentioned the international rules-based order, but said led by China and Russia. And
But see,
you know
guys,
what?
and that's and
they
that,
just
and,
get what he wants, right?
and people think that is a throwaway statement or just rhetoric that we're.
Oh
supposed
no,
to
he
be-
means it.
But see, here's the thing that we don't pay attention to, and they dropped the other shoe on that today. If you were paying attention, and that is, and they came out and somebody made reference to the fact they were talking about the UN order of, it, and their view is we're not going to use NATO or something like NATO. We're going to use the United Nations because they have spent 15 or 20 years rewiring the United Nations. And if you don't believe me, just go back and look at the behavior of the World Health Organization in COVID.
They are masters.
It was China centric. And
China
go back
used
and
it
look.
to
One
China used
second.
it to put military police in
One
Haiti and take over mines. So
And go look at the composition of the United Nations Human Rights Committee and the countries that make up the Human Rights Committee of the United Nations. Iran, China, Syria. I mean, it's bizarro world, okay? In that context, they've already hardwired the structure they intend to use to jam this down our throat, and we're still paying the lion's share of it.
They are masterful at the long game of taking control of multilateral organizations. And they work on it in multiple decade time cycles. They're in the WTO. They're in health. They're in the UN. And they do it systematically by putting thousands of people to work. They have very good depth on this stuff.
And if
And-
they don't have one, they make one up. The Shanghai Cooperation.
yes.
SCO.
Organization.
Well, SCO is what was present at this meeting in Moscow.
Right.
So all those Central Asian things. So this is China's point, where China has known that it is the continental power that will be preeminent in Eurasia. They just know it, right? It's instinctive. They understand it. They've moved towards it. It's time now. And everybody in Central Asia is looking at it saying, maybe it is time for us to change the vector analysis of inbound, outbound strengths, north-south weaknesses. And it's why this thing in Azerbaijan is cooking off. It's why the Iranians and the Saudis are back together.
See what's kind of funny, though, is they may eventually come to regret this, because the
it may not work. No,
the
right.
Chinese expect something in return. We just give shit away, like Stan was saying. Hey, here's $10 million, to curb, homosexual, blah blah blah, such and such in a Muslim country, and the Pakistanis took that money and said, "Oh, thank you very much. We're going to go buy whatever."
So I wish.
Can I give you guys a really good example today of how this differs in its outcomes? The IMF today approved I want to, and I may have this wrong. I've been looking at a lot of numbers. I'm just going to run with this number. If I'm wrong, I'm off. But a $13 billion loan to Sri Lanka.
Yeah, restructuring.
Now, those of you who've been on the CFC panel, and we've talked about Sri Lanka ad nauseum relative to Sri Lanka's importance, about how they fell for the $50 billion worth of loans from the Chinese government for Belt and Road. And then they bought the WEF initiative, and they became, I don't know, vegans and solarites and wind power guys and all the rest of that sort of stuff, and created their own economy. Anybody want to guess what the first 50 billion of that thing, of that facility was used for?
You're
Pay back
repaying
the
loans by
Chinese.
China.
Pay back the Chinese. They're not even giving shit away, and they're still getting paid. They're getting something out of it.
Well,
Meanwhile,
yeah,
China still holds the port there, right?
Yeah, I mean that's what I'm getting at, is they're going to get something out of it. So in that particular, it's not Huambuta, it's the other whatever port. The same thing they did in Uganda. That's a very nice airport. We're going to take that. So all these people are going to look at the calculus of, well, these guys really are the power to be, so I want to be on their side. They may end up regretting it, because China's going to get something from them.
China gets the Hambantota port, right? The big port they bought. They get the airport. They get the logistics components. And what you have to remember is that's all in Rajapaksa's hometown, right? And this is where the Chinese are great. They can do that, right? We have the FCPA, right? Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Our guys can't go in and compete with the Chinese. Chinese come in and say, who's in charge? Who's vulnerable? Who'll give us pole position regardless of the deal? And they run with it. And then they end up having these hooks. So the latest round, Stan, was $3 billion, and it's an emergency loan.
Correct. The IMF did something else for 13.
So all I'm trying to say is, wouldn't you think that we would look at all these things, and Jim, you've brought that FCP whatever up before. We've talked about that. All these things that put us businesses at a disadvantage all over the place. We should be looking at all these constraints and saying, it's time to change some stuff, because we're getting smoked.
Yeah. So the only people
we're not going to.
So the only people who can break these rules, this is why we lead with the Pentagon, because the only people who can say, okay, we're going to suspend reality and we're going to put X billions of dollars to work, we're going to push bales of money out of the back of C-130s, are the CIA, the Pentagon, and the other entities within the intelligence community who can do extra legal acts, right? And that's hobbled our ability as a country to compete because we have no sustainable position other than putting the DOD in there. And that's why they're in Syria now. That's why we stuck it out so long in Laos and Cambodia. That's the only way you can hide things. You go into the black budget and you say we just don't want to talk about it. It doesn't offer long-term stability. You can't control an economy, can't direct projects. You can't assess
when
the
all you
proper
have is a
risk.
hammer, everything looks like a nail, right?
And you can't assess the risks of redeveloping the community in order to create a productive economy. So you end up with these hobbled economies for decades. And I mean, Iraq reconstruction, perfect example. Afghanistan reconstruction, perfect example. We just can't keep doing this. We have to let U.S. commerce engage. And sadly, I think we've lost the skills. Go to talk to the Department of Commerce and ask them what they do. They don't do this. They don't do this international trade stuff. It's the Pentagon. It's USAID sometimes. But you know, I wish Ron was here because you know he's been on the wrong side of that deal structure too many times. And I'm sure he's watched some just wacky upside down kind of deals.
Okay,
But
so
go ahead.
What about you, Max?
Here's what I'd like to do. We've now, I think, laid out a very good premise as to our shortcomings from an execution perspective in the face of this new challenge that has arisen in this alliance between Russia and China. I'd like to pivot us back to discussing the sort of blocking and tackling as it relates to this summit and what we expect to have happen in the near term as a result of this. Because I think that's where our topic is at this particular point. We could continue this, but I think anybody who's watching this now has an understanding of what we think are our shortcomings from an execution perspective, where we've hobbled our own ponies in many instances, or where we've lost the muscle memory of how to do the things we need to do to be effective in anything short of declaring somebody a terrorist and then going to war with them without a congressional authorization. We're masters at that.
We've already got the boilerplate sitting on the desk.
Yeah, we don't even have to change it. We just have to fudge the definition a little bit, and you too can be subject to the military-industrial complex.
As long as you use black ink, they'll accept it. Just send it in.
So let's go back to that slide that we had up about the questions about what came out of the summit, if I could, Watcher. So I think we've talked a good deal about what the objectives of this meeting were to a degree, and that was to put the world on notice that there's, I hate to use the phrase, there's a new sheriff in town, but that's not far afield. I mean, if you read the stuff on the right-hand side, this relationship has gone far beyond just a bilateral framework and has acquired critical importance for the global landscape. Paraphrase, it's no longer about Sino-Russian trade. It's about what we as a pair of yoked oxen can do to shape the future of mankind. That's very different than anything we've ever heard before out of this. And then in sort of a much more linear fashion, change is coming that hasn't occurred in 100 years, and we're driving this alteration collectively. That was said as Xi was leaving the first night's meeting, standing on the porch there at the Kremlin, shaking hands with Putin, calling him his good buddy. And so that's pretty linear, pretty clear. Who do you guys think was the audience of this meeting? There were multiple audiences, but let's try to delineate who this was aimed at.
It's aimed at the developing world. I mean, it's aimed at all the countries that the China-Russia alliance wants to collect into its circle. I mean, what happened? What did the world look like 100 years ago? It was a multipolar world.
Mhm.
It didn't become we didn't become a superpower really till after World War II. In 1920, it was a multipolar world, and I think that's what Xi is talking about when he says, something that we haven't seen in 100 years. Xi and Putin are going to grind the U.S. out of its position as the preeminent, or superpower, whatever you want to call it, and they're going to recreate a multipolar world. And the audience is all the rest of the nations and the heads of state and the business leaders and all of these developing countries. They're just saying, hey, join us, and we can sit at the table as equals, and we don't have to put up with this annoying spoiled child, gender dysphoria United States.
So my take on it is similar. What I think is that China's just exhausted by us, but they see that Russia's vulnerable. They need what Russia has, so they'll play Putin and they'll play the Russians, who they see as Europeans, right? So Russians are not Han Chinese, so they fall into a usability factor, and so the Chinese are going to use this to discredit anything other than their mechanism. And they've been heavily attacked, right? For, Belt and Road, the way they do their debt. The attractiveness of the Chinese is that they'll come in and work with people who do things that put America and Europe on edge, right? So they can play in places we can't. This is going to be Xi's mechanism to play where we've historically played. Saudi Arabia is a really good example, which is they're going to up their game in dealing with the Saudis. And we've lowered our game in dealing with the Saudis. And we've put ourselves in a vulnerable position. So they're going to pick off the areas that are low-hanging fruit. And they'll do it without remorse. And they'll do it without any domestic pushback. They don't have the same complexities in their domestic constituencies that we have. And they're going to play that against us. And TikTok, they're running the TikTok play right now as a distraction tool. And they're using what we do and say against TikTok, that Chinese company, right? And put big capital letters, Chinese company. They're going to use that for domestic purposes to justify Xi's positions internationally, should there be any pressures back. They don't want Russia to collapse. They're backing Russia. If Russia collapses, they'll take what they need from Russia in the way of resources and control. I think that's at the base of their strategy now.
Matt, we haven't heard anything from you. Can I get you to weigh in to the extent you want to?
Of course. I was simply being polite, waiting my turn, and thoroughly nodding my head and agreeing with 100%, which is actually kind of rare. But going back to the very beginning of all this, point number one, what were the objectives of the meeting? The objectives of the meeting are multi-layered, but first and foremost, that's an announcement to the world, both the developing world and here in the United States, that the United States is irrelevant. They are planning, and this is very clear to me at least, and hopefully to many others, they're planning for a world without the United States, the unipolar world, so to speak. That was their primary objective, and I would go so far to say is that this was also, if we're looking at point number two, who's the audience of this meeting, this was also a statement to India, which is a topic of conversation that we haven't even broached.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I'm glad you brought that up because
they are telling India, hey, you're either going to work with us, you're not going to be a thorn in our side, you're not going to be the third wheel. And they're also telling, I am certain that in that 3 days in Moscow, that in a private conversation between Xi Jinping's diplomatic party and Vladimir Putin's diplomatic party, and Sergei Lavrov and the whole crew, that India came up many times, and that, hey, you're eventually going to have to pick a side in this, because there's going to be a fight. And India is a friend to you and a friend to the United States. And there was probably some terseness that came off there. That could be a fracture. When I look at things for the United States, I kind of think about it. If I were in power, of course, that's a pipe dream, obviously. But if I were in power, how would I exploit those fractures between potential adversaries? And that's exactly how I would do it. I think India is a very important ally, and has been, if we were to court that ally. And something that Trump and Pompeo attempted to do. We saw that during the Trump years. I think probably most significantly with the importation of Mahindra tractors and the Mahindra Roxor, and kind of this warming up to India as a potential alternative manufacturing base to China. And of course, with that all kind of ignores the fact that there's a significant level of elite capture and compromise that has occurred on part of the Chinese, and in particular the Democrat Party. The Republicans are guilty of this too. Calling it right down the middle, they're guilty of this too. But it is obvious on part of the Democrats. It is obvious. It is plain as day for anybody with the eyes to see it. And the fact that Biden is as deeply compromised as he is with the Chinese. And notice we're not hearing anything about this.
Nope.
We're not hearing anything about this. Instead, we're going to hear about Stormy Daniels and all this nonsense, right? It's just noise. So again, going back to the point number one, the objectives of this meeting was really to tell the world that there is no longer a unipolar world in terms of the United States controlling the order of things. I think that somewhere in the indefinite future, and I don't like putting timelines on things, but somewhere in the indefinite future, when BRICS makes a more formal announcement and a more formal pact, we're going to see the Saudis and the Iranians, rather, getting a little tongue-tied. The Saudis and the Iranians coming to the table as well in a more formal sense. This is something that even 3 years ago I would have said would be nonsense, and yet here we are. When it occurred, I think I said something to the tune of hell has officially frozen over. But here we are. And I think that we're going to see some interesting things very, very soon coming out of the brewing conflict with Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Iran. And whatever hand Russia plays in that, whatever hand China plays in that, because they all are. So where I'm going with all this is that here in the United States, we're so busy caught up in the minutia because we do not have a long-term view of civilization. And something that old Hong Kong said, something you brought up, Jim, it was exactly right, was that China regards us as the moment in time, the event, the minor event. And I agree 100% with you that was they intended on using that as a very loaded statement targeting us, and that is what they mean. It's the reality is that we're going to wake up one day, and probably a day very soon, the dollar is no longer going to be the world's reserve currency. And so all this conversation about the banking industry and the dire straits that it's in, and whatever the Fed's interest rate is going to be a moot point. And that's a very scary thing for a lot of people to even wrap their mind around, because for myself, I've never lived in a world where the dollar wasn't the world reserve currency. So I don't even know what that world is going to look like, but it's probably not going to be pretty. But the point is that China and Russia have a very long-term strategic view of the world, and we do not.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think the inclusion of India into this discussion was a much needed sort of and I don't doubt for a minute that part of Putin's brief, his takeaway from this is you need to deliver India. I mean, the Russians have a long-standing relationship with the Indians, and certainly the Chinese aren't going to, unless they want to solve it with cricket bats wrapped with barbed wire in the Himalayas someplace. But I don't think that's what they're going for. And I think but one of the things Putin's got to do, he's got to deliver Modi to the table in that regard. So, Watch, I'm going to ask we go back to we finish this list and we'll move on. My question was, where did this meeting outperform, if at all? I don't know what the expectations were going in. I think I would amend this question to y'all, and that is, was this meeting successful from the point of view of the participants?
She is coming out as the next pivotal Chinese leader on a scale with Mao Zedong. So,
I think his scale really goes because Mao never had this level of global engagement. Mao was always
but within China,
correct.
Actually, he was globally known. I think this is China's coming out party.
This is global relevance, not global recognition, and I think he's playing from a place that Mao never was, and that Jiang Zemin and others only wished they were at this point in their tenure. I think the alignment has occurred, and I think he's got the opportunity to do things that no other Chinese leader has ever, and that's 5,000 years, has ever had the opportunity to achieve.
Correct.
Yeah. And I think the meeting it outperformed in a sense that look at us now. We're here talking about this meeting where they didn't release minutes or notes, where they didn't have a bunch of PowerPoint slides with all the bullet items and the agreements and all the
talking points
handshakes
handed out to the media and all the rest.
Yeah,
of that sort
they
of
didn't
stuff.
do any of that. So what are we all doing? We're all sitting here going, well, did they or didn't they? Or what was decided? Something was decided there. What was decided there? They're leaving us, wondering what they're going to do next, and that puts them, in an advantageous position. And I think in that sense, that did outperform. I'd say, bravo! That was a smooth move on the part of Xi and Putin to just kind of walk away, shake hands, everything's great, and then not say a word.
So this is a much better mechanism by which to develop Belt and Roads goals, which were delayed by the difficulty of execution. They're now in a much better position. They've got Saudi on side.
Mm-hmm.
They've got Russia on side. They have Iran and Saudi not competing. And they're looking ascendant. And so not only are they compliant with third world graft, but they're looking ascendant. So I think they're going to be successful on this run. And it's up to us to moderate it and protect ourselves. And that's going to be quite an exercise.
Let's move on to the next question, and that is, are there any areas in this meeting failed to meet either China or Russia's expectations? And I'll offer something. I don't know that it's entirely germane. I don't think they had high expectations for the acceptance of this 12-point peace plan. But Xi didn't spend a lot of time talking about the war in Ukraine.
No, because that's just a convenience issue.
Right.
For the Chinese, keeping us engaged in the war in Ukraine is good.
Yes,
it contributes to the message.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. Tangible outcomes? two that I have in mind. One is the open acknowledgement of trade, basically between Russia and China and the Southern Hemisphere, denominated in the yuan. The acknowledgement of that, I think, is a big deal. We've known this is coming, but this is a tangible outcome of this meeting that I think, like much of the rest of this meeting, is putting people on notice that this is just this isn't a college dissertation. This is real.
Yeah, the Yubel's real. It's here.
Yeah.
It is among us.
I think the other thing that people are trying to figure out is there was a new economic agreement, which they've described as planning in nature and this and that, and again, not given any specifics on. But they've now set new goals, or in the process of setting new goals for bilateral trade between the two countries out to 2030, I think it was.
2030. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's got one way to go. And this is a relationship that you really couldn't draw up any better if you tried to. Big contiguous border. One is long natural resources, the other is long people and productive capacity. I mean, it's not a relationship of equals per se, but it is a functioning symbiosis that I think has got a long way to run. And I think that the interwoven nature of that symbiosis just got much, much deeper.
Yep.
Out of necessity from the Russians' part, out of convenience from the Chinese part. And it's much easier to deal with, one nation like Russia than it is to stitch together a bunch of, suboptimal partners. They'll do that too, but this is a baseline under what the Russian needs are for food and energy in the coming next 7, 8, 10 years.
Yep. Well, I think that outcome-wise, I don't think Putin expected Xi to come out so far on top, and Xi is just running with it, and that's an outcome, but it was not necessarily what Putin wanted.
Yeah, I think Putin knows that he's got to pay a price for the miscalculations that were made.
And you'd rather do it with the Chinese in a quiet way.
Else. Right.
Yep.
Right.
The Chinese assure that he can't lose, right? He might not be able to win, but the Chinese help him assure that he can't lose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's correct. There's a survivability mechanism attached with the alliance with China that wouldn't be there if he were on his own, or he was relying just on Lukashenko or somebody else from that perspective.
Yeah.
Think about this. I mean, Xi can push the Ukraine conflict into negotiations, and Russia can end up exiting Ukraine with all of Zaporizhia, Donetsk, Luhansk, all that territory that they have right now, and control of the access into Crimea. Then I'd say Putin would be pretty happy playing second fiddle to Xi in that case, because that's exactly what Putin wants. I mean, he wants that territory. He would like to probably quit, get out of the war on top. And she's the ticket to that, with that peace plan that really didn't get a lot of play, but I expect that we'll hear more and more about as the weeks go by.
Yeah, I think
like that redhead he met at the bar one weekend. It was fun, but now how do you extract yourself? Right.
Yeah. That's what you worry about the next day, right?
And who does she work for, and why is she talking to me?
Yeah, exactly.
That never deterred me. Just saying.
Admiral Farragut, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead.
Hungarian redheads.
Rick Duke of Malta does make one observation that I was going to make, and that is Odessa is still on the menu.
Very much so. That's why you're seeing some of the sabers being rattled around Moldova.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
And that's the no-fly announcement that's been enhanced, which is no American aircraft are welcome over the Black Sea. And I have a feeling that they're going to start taking action on that.
It makes it awful easy to move an amphib group.
we've talked a great deal about the interpretation of this meeting by the U.S. and its dependents, unfunded dependents, as I like to call them. Anything else we want to exacerbate? The shrill sort of emotional response to this from European leaders and Tony Blinken. You notice Biden has been AWOL throughout this process. It's kind of what you expect, and it just sort of plays back into the non-serious feedback loop. So I think we can leave that alone. Here's the real interesting question. So now what happens? What is the next step here? I think the only thing that's sort of cast in stone is that, and maybe not even that, is that Xi intends to talk to Zelensky at some point. I don't know what the timing of that is. And Zelensky has sort of, beat his chest and acted like a 42-pound gorilla. Yeah, we'll talk, but we're talking on my terms. I don't think he's got the message yet. So that's likely to happen. But what else manifests in your view from this? And what are the next steps in terms of not even from the U.S.'s perspective per se, but what are the further manifestations of the deepening relationship between Russia and China that come out of this meeting? And what is that? Yeah, what form does that take? I will say that real quickly, Jim. I'll say this for public consumption. We said it a little bit before the show, and that is, I for one never expected the Chinese to come out and do what the NATO allies do, and that is list material and serial numbers of what they intend to provide Ukraine. I didn't expect that to happen. I think a lot of this has been done in a way that Xi can sort of stay above that stuff.
Exactly.
And continue to prosecute his role as the dominant political force on the planet, and not get sucked into the whole sort of sanctions regime and the ICC aspects and all the things all the briar patch that Putin has been called up into. But I'm interested in y'all's view of that. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen. That doesn't mean that stuff's not going to flow from China into Russia, dual use or whatever you want to call it. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about the fact that Armenia and Turkey are now the two leading export sources for electrical equipment.
Yeah, the transshipment
to Russia.
To
Russia. I mean, scratch your head on that one. So it's going to happen. The question is the pace going to pick up? Is it going to become more sophisticated in nature? What do we think is the trajectory of lethal aid from China or things that can contribute to lethal assistance, China to Russia? And
China's contributed arms all over the world without attribution forever. They're not going to stop.
Yeah, they're very, Norinco and China Southern, they're very good at this. And so the unmarked brass, the, propellant of choice, the explosive of choice, they've been doing this for years. And the volumes they're capable of producing, given their industrial scale, they've already spun up. The interesting thing is everybody talks about the guided munitions and the missile systems that Russia's burned out on. The Chinese can quintuple the production that the Russians can do. And they've had access to most of the technology the Russians have. A lot of the platforms are common. I think you're going to see lots and lots of new missiles arriving on Russian aircraft and on Russian surface platforms, and they're just going to be untraceable.
So do we think there was a real motivation behind the fact that Putin wanted Victor Bout out of prison for Brittany Griner?
Yeah.
Do you think Victor's pretty busy right now? Huh?
I think Victor's happy to be free, and
we're back, baby. We're
doing what he does. Yeah.
Well, I think with that long of a land border and most of it mountainous and rough territory, no one's going to know what's actually going back and forth.
And it really, and everybody, it's one of those things of everybody will wring their hands in DC. Nobody really cares. At the end of the day, the Russians are going to get what the Russians need. The Chinese just wanted to have the big image plant, and they wanted their long-term position staked out. And it's all been going on in the background. I mean, 152 millimeter howitzer shell. It's trust me, it's Chinese now. They burned through pretty much everything else. So I honestly just think that the Chinese have been supplying lethal aid into much of the world for a long time. The Russian ask is not unique, but what's going to be unique is that all of the high tech stuff the Russians want, the Chinese are going to produce for them, and they'll send the subsets of components as needed. I wouldn't be surprised if there were technicians and labor being pushed into Russian factories now to figure it out and
Look
do
at
the
all the
tech
Baofeng
transfer.
radios moving from China to
Yeah,
Russia.
exactly.
Yeah.
So
all these boxes about things.
this is a small ask.
And at certain price points, you get a free copy of Brush Beater's book.
Yeah, this is a really small
I
ask
knew
from
it.
the standpoint
I knew
of China.
I'd say that if China increases significantly the lethal aid to Russia, that's a game changer. That's a checkmate right there. There's no way the U.S. and Europe combined can outproduce China and Russia when it comes to munitions that that Russia would use in Ukraine. So I mean, it's game over essentially, and I think that if I was Xi Jinping, I would ramp up my production in a way that people would notice it, that people in Washington would notice it, that people in Warsaw would notice it, that numbnuts in Kiev would notice. And then I would just let that settle for a little bit. And then I would come back and say, okay, that 12-point peace plan, are we ready to sit down and talk about this? Or do you just want me to send another 1 or 2 million artillery rounds that the Russians can drop on the last 40,000 Ukraine military personnel? I mean, we cannot outproduce the Russia-China alliance with munitions, and that right there that's the end. The end is in sight. The 5 moves down the chessboard, you already lost.
So I want to toss in one of the most important and overarching things that we need to keep in mind is how does this all impact climate change?
Oh, we'll table that until the end. We'll talk about that at the end.
Okay.
So let me move on to our next slide. Well, I think we've covered a lot of this, and so I thought we would. I think that I think the one that's a little different here that we really haven't spent a lot of time on is Russia and China curbing Western power and NATO expansion into Asia. I struggle to put those words together in a sentence, but we'll take it as what it is. And so I think we've covered this, and I think we've probably covered the next slide as well. Let's just take a look to make sure. What did Putin take away? I love this photograph, and I have to say this. I love Dmitry Medvedev. I'd like to hang out with Dmitry Medvedev. I think he would be a lot of fun to be around because he's always good for a soundbite one way or another. But I think the body language between Lavrov and Medvedev in the red circle as this meeting was wrapping up, I think it tells you what you needed to know about what Putin took away. I mean, I think that's pretty straightforward.
They've been saved.
Yeah.
They just had their asses pulled out of the fire, and they know it, and they architected it with their old friends, and here we are. Comintern has reversed flow and is working really well.
Yeah, I think that's right. And yes, Power of Siberia 2 will get built because there's no cheaper way for China to buy natural gas anywhere else on the planet. So let's go to the next slide. So here's the tricky part, though. One of the problems about being number 2 in a bilateral relationship is that somebody's in charge and somebody's not so much in charge. And there was one development here that I thought was pretty interesting. And this goes back to Jim's comment about all the SCO countries being in attendance here. And on his way out the door, Xi said this again sort of reinforces in a not very subtle but somewhat diplomatic manner who's in charge and who's calling the tune here. She extends an invitation to Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and the Kyrgyz to come attend a Central Asia summit in Beijing in May, while he was still in Moscow. That used to not be the sort of thing that got done, but that was also a way of sort of saying, who's
Who's
in
the
charge?
boss?
Look
Yeah,
at
the
who's the boss.
vector analysis is different today.
Correct. And from a Russian perspective, I've always loved this meme. But from a Russian perspective, I was just playing around with the sort of notion of, if this thing really goes sideways, and you mean this is all about Siberia? And the notion it always was, because I think deep in the Chinese soul there's an element of that as it relates to.
By Siberia, we mean the Northern Resource Area, as
Yes.
China calls it.
Correct.
Now the whole Kazakhstan, Kazakh, Uzbek, Tajik, could that also not be kind of an acknowledgement of the extended Russian, sphere of influence?
Oh, it's part of the
Give me-
near abroad. Yeah, it
Yeah.
always has been. I mean, look, particularly Kazakhstan, and Jim, you can keep me honest on this. I've forgotten what the percentage of the population of Kazakhstan is ethnic Russian. It's large. So I mean, it's always been top of the table in terms of the way they've thought about the near abroad. Not to mention Baikonur's there, right?
Yeah.
And so allowing the Chinese to meddle there, meddle may not be the right word, but you get my drift, is an acknowledgement of sorts in terms of who's got the ability to stitch this together. The Russians Putin has always wanted to stitch it back together. He just doesn't have the throw weight to get it done right now.
And basically what it does is it tells the Central Asian countries that you can't play us off each other anymore.
That's important as well.
We're going to have that monolithic thing. I mean, when the Chinese first started doing the trans-border work in Kazakhstan, they had a facility on the border because the rail gauges changed, right?
Yep. Yes, it does.
By design. And at that yard, there was a certain percentage of Kazakh workers
Easy
that
there,
had to
Rick.
be there. And I was talking to somebody about it, and he said it's really interesting. He said, on Saturdays when work ends, everybody goes in, and they had brawls between the Chinese and the Kazakh workers on a regular basis because there's a lot of animosity, cultural animosity. And, over time that's kind of faded, but the Chinese have always been seen as a slight outsider in these places because they prefer the Russian alliance in a counterbalance. I think that's gone now, and they're going to be told what it looks like going forward. And none of them have the capacity to resist both China and Russia pushing on them in the same way. So you're going to see a continental economy roll out across those places. And the wheat will begin to go in different directions, and the gas will begin to go in different directions. And they won't need the maritime piece. And I think the passive threat from the United States against the maritime supply chain to China just cut that requirement right out. So they've really created a resilient structure by getting the Russians to do direct overland delivery of pretty much everything they need. So they can survive a kerfuffle around Taiwan better than we can.
True.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else on this?
I just
sort
say,
of go ahead. Let's wrap up our China Russia summit, and then we'll move on to topic 2, which we'll get through in short order.
I would just say, from a U.S. perspective regarding the meeting, I think we probably need to spend a little bit less time listening to what people like Antony Blinken are saying, or the White House press secretary, or Kirby, and we got to start paying more attention to what China is actually doing. We need to shift, because right now we're only going to get the propaganda, the party line, the bullshit. There's going to be a lot of holes in the truth coming from Washington D.C. But if we start seeing increased supplies of lethal aid, or just, Russia is firing a lot more artillery rounds, is shooting more precision guided munitions, where are they getting them? Okay, probably getting them from China. That's going to be a big indicator that things are going to change in that Russia-Ukraine conflict, because I just don't see I don't see that anyone with a straight face can sit there and say, yeah, we're just going to continue feeding Ukraine, millions of rounds of artillery and F-16s and MiG-29s and all this stuff, when we know just from a sheer numbers perspective that Ukraine will cease to exist in 6 months or 8 months or 12 months or whatever. So but we'll get that heads up from actually watching what China does.
So before we leave this topic, I want to close the loop on something that we've all talked about together in the past, and that is overlay Taiwan on this discussion a little bit, and then we'll move on. I mean, so what is this? What does this foretell? What does this mean as it relates to China's agenda in Taiwan? And I'm particularly interested in the time window that I think they acknowledge exists relative to Biden's election. We seem to think that they're going to wait around until AUKUS is implemented and then try to take Taiwan. And I'm not sure that's really quite the game plan from that perspective. So I just, what does it mean tactically? What does it mean strategically as it relates to their desire to do something, and as it relates to consolidating Taiwan?
Well, I don't think. Well, let's put it this way. I think China is going by the old maxim: don't interrupt your enemy when they're doing something stupid.
Yeah.
And their enemy is the U.S. And we're doing something stupid right now with Ukraine. They're going to let us dig that hole as deep as we, as we want to. And then when they figure out, okay, that's as deep as they're going to go, and we're in an advantageous position, then they can ramp up their coercive actions against Taiwan, maybe force a negotiate a reunification via the Kuomintang party. I mean, that's when the gloves will come off. But right now, I don't think they want to interrupt us from digging that hole.
There's been an interesting couple of tells in the last few months. I mean, in January, there was the announcement of the arrest of the senior military guys, the retired admiral, a couple of other people, for spying on behalf of the PRC. And there's been a real movement by the KMT leaders to try to reconsolidate power in Taiwan. And you got to understand the relationship between the KMT and the party. It's pretty tight. So I think there's a aggressive movement underway to kind of stall or back up this democratic push and the concept of Taiwanese nationalism. We'll see how it goes. It may backfire on the KMT, but the arrests were interesting of the military guys. So they've purged the people they know of, and they were rather senior and well respected. And I think a lot of that may be pressure from us. Would be my guess, probably between us and the Japanese. We basically said, get your shit together from a military standpoint. But they're not in a position to defend themselves. And the Chinese know that. The Chinese don't want to fight them. They just want to absorb them. So, we'll see. It's going to be a pivotal year for Taiwan. And if they go hard, they better be ready to build up their military, and they better win us over. I don't see that pathway, but they may do it.
All right. Very good. Well, I think that brings us to the end of this discussion. I'll put it up for a discussion. We can move on quickly and talk a little bit about Credit Suisse, or we can draw a line under it at this point. The Credit Suisse thing isn't going to go anywhere. We can pick it up at a later point. What's everybody's pleasure as it relates to that?
Well, my opinion on Credit Suisse is interesting because there are very few financial alternatives out there left to people to structure deals of consequence. And if you take the Swiss out of it, you lose that neutral territory. Less neutral now that they've got to deal with us, but you lose that neutral territory, the non-U.S., non-EU territory to do a deal in. I think it bodes really well for Dubai, and I think you spoke to that. So it also bodes well to the intermediary step of other than dollar type stuff. The Swedes, the Swiss and the Austrians in their counter trade experience of long ago have a much better position and experience level to deal with the complexities of these new models that are forming in Dubai and Singapore. So,
Let's quickly go through this. I think we've got 3 slides. We can do it rather quickly. So let's go to the first slide of this.
it's timely.
This is just having a little bit of fun. 10 days ago, I talked about the fact that there would be a shotgun wedding over the weekend, and it turned out to be exactly that. I'm not here to talk about, and I don't want us to get into the decade-long decline of Credit Suisse. But I think the thing that we want to focus on here, because I think it's a material adverse development for Switzerland and its brand. Not the only one, but it's maybe the biggest one at this point. And what I'm focused on is the fact that over a weekend, the Swiss government basically threw out the rule book of capitalism and exercised the finest authoritarian oligarchism that I've seen really anywhere. So with typical Swiss efficiency, they got done in a weekend what would take the Russians or the Chinese much more time to get done. And that is they basically said the shareholders don't get to vote on this deal. And if you're a bondholder, well, usually you're senior in credit status, in seniority status to equity, but not in this case. And we can talk about why that happened, but it just, trust me, that they did do that. And they wrote off in ways that I'm not sure they had the legal authority to do it per se, but they just said to people who were holding about $17 billion worth of these convertible contingent bonds for Credit Suisse, sorry guys, you're not getting anything. And when the question was asked why, the answer is because we can't do it any other way. Now, that's probably not going to hold, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But what I'm interested in asking you to think about, we don't have to answer this tonight, and that is, I think this really damages Switzerland and its brand as it relates to, this efficient arbiter of financial everything. Its ability to take in money from wherever and manage it effectively, and that the rule of law is paramount in a place like Switzerland. It turns out
they still got clocks, Stan.
Yeah, I know, but those clocks are probably made in China these days. And so the point is that I think Switzerland has really shot itself in the anatomy. And let's talk a little about who won and who lost. So next slide. This happened a little faster. We talked about these bondholders, and I'm not talking about, Susie Smith's 401k. I'm talking about PIMCO and Invesco and some very big institutional holders that held large numbers of these bonds, and including some of the hedge funds, David Tepper in particular, who were holding these bonds, who got zeroed out. And they've all gotten together now and sort of said, you know what, we don't think that's going to stand. And for the following reasons that are on the right-hand side. I mean, Credit Suisse was listed and subject to regulators in both New York and Zurich. And publicly traded companies in those places, and not even publicly traded, but in corporate law in both jurisdictions, shareholders have the final say on what happens when you go to sell a company. That didn't happen. And it was just unilaterally eliminated voting rights for the shareholders of both UBS, who probably wouldn't have done this deal without it, and Credit Suisse, whose shareholders got stooped because of the fact that they had no recourse, they had no ability to negotiate. And this piece makes the point that even Bear Stearns shareholders had the opportunity to vote to approve their forced takeover by J.P. Morgan, and by doing so, they got a better deal out of it. And so the basically is the myth of Switzerland being a place that runs like Mike's aforementioned Swiss watch, I think has been shattered to a good portion of the world who cares about their money being managed appropriately, who cares about transparency, who cares about the rule of law. And so the question's going to be, and some of the people who got burned the worst were investors in the Gulf, the Saudis, the Qataris, people who have a lot of money, who have relied on Switzerland a lot in the past. And I think they're going to be moving with their feet soon. So the question is, where are they going? And we'll go to the next slide, and then we'll be done. As I said, I've made the point about the Swiss government and banks. Who are the winners? I think you're going to continue to see, in conjunction with this transition of the Gulf and Saudi Arabia. I don't think Saudi Arabia is going to have a homegrown champion from a money management perspective. I think that there's a lot of constraint that they're subject to under Islamic law, and they have to sort of toe the line on that, given that they're the keepers of Mecca and Medina. But I think Dubai and Abu Dhabi probably benefit from this. I think Singapore benefits from this. I would have said Hong Kong, but I think there's a Chinese overhang there that may stop some people from doing it. But the whole notion that Credit Suisse was going to win big market share in China, I think that went out the window as well. But I did see that Singapore and Hong Kong publicly came out today and said, we, unlike the Swiss, if you're thinking about where to put your money, or you're thinking about where to manage your investments, or you're thinking about banks in which to place your funding, we, if there ever is a problem, will never do what the Swiss just did to you. We won't unilateral. We will recognize the seniority inherent in your capital structure, and shareholders will have a right to vote. So the ink's not dry on any of this stuff yet, and already the plates are trying to shift to new money centers, and that drift is eastward from Switzerland. It is not towards the United States. It's not towards London. It's not towards Frankfurt. It's not towards Paris, for all the reasons we've talked about before. So I think we'll leave it at that. I think this is a trend you need to watch. I think, again, the sort of economic center of gravity continues to move more and more to Asia for a whole bunch of reasons. And I think the Swiss have really sort of shot themselves in the foot here. And this comes on top of, their cooperation with the IRS as it relates to taxes, and to a great extent, the breach of anonymity within the Swiss banking system. This is just, this is elite institution capture by another playbook. And I'll open the floor up to anybody who wants to comment on this or not.
I agree.
No, I agree entirely.
It's underway.
Yeah. And I saw Lombard Odier, which is a pretty good Swiss bank. I think the bank to watch in Switzerland is going to be Julius Baer. They may have the opportunity to pull some chestnuts out of the fire on this, but I don't think they're big enough to get that done. But even the old traditional Swiss banks, I think the sun may be setting on that institution. That's not going to happen right away, but I think the sun may be, its better days may be behind it at this point.
Agreed.
Gentlemen, thank you. I'm sorry I didn't get to say goodbye to Max, for he had to bail, but we always appreciate Max being on and sharing his insight. What's up for the rest of the week, Joe? What are you going to be doing?
Several people have asked me for a couple of comments and articles on tradecraft as things continue to get more and more contentious within the continental U.S. So I decided that maybe on Friday I will. I'll be attending a pretty contentious situation in Lansing tomorrow, where Gabby Giffords is going to be here, trying to push, along with Davey Hogg, trying to push through some sketchy, at best, gun laws. So I'm sure there will be some field reporting to come out of that.
Well, yeah. Can you take Kyle Rittenhouse with you just to sort of mix it up and sort of see how that goes?
I don't need to take Kyle Rittenhouse with me, but yeah.
Well, I was just it was for high cover. I mean,
I thought Joe said there was no spooning.
Yeah, there's no spoon.
I think Kyle's a little more focused on his girlfriend at this point. So
In Palm Beach.
I haven't.
It's
been
good to be
following-
Kyle Rittenhouse.
I haven't been following the adventures of Kyle Rittenhouse very much, so I'll plead ignorance to that. James, as our resident swamp denizen, what's up with you, bud?
It's a mess up there, man. I really like the people I work with on a day-to-day basis, but boy, I would not want to be in one of the policy shops up there right now. What is going on a macro level? Geez, let me count the ways, Stan. Yeah, this week, helping people with risk. It's a lot of what I'm doing. And trying to solve some riddles around steel making. And watching Africa closely, because there's just a lot of stuff going on there that we're doing. We're involved in so many things in Africa. It's crazy. So that's kind of my week.
Very good, Mike. You're on the downhill slope, literally.
Yep.
On your time there, and I think you're headed to Vegas, if I recall. Is that?
Yep. I've got some small business to take care of while I'm here. I've got some tattoo repair tomorrow at noon, where there's little pieces of the tattoo that didn't come out properly or whatever. And then Saturday I get my hair cut, and I actually will be writing. It's funny you say tradecraft, Joe. I'm writing a whole bunch. Basically, the original Warlock goes through the Camp Peary training, but not at Camp Peary. He kind of gets a very personal POI for him, developed just for him. So I'm doing that. And then, it's time to get on the road. Time to get on the road and start driving again.
Well, I hope it's been a great winter for you. It sounds like it has been, and you've got an interesting road trip back up to. You can't get there from here, and I hope you enjoy every bit of it. And stay in contact with us.
Once I hit the road, I'll be out of. But once I get back, I'll touch base.
Very good, very good. Matt, who you teaching what this week?
Well, this week is a week off. Well, from teaching, be running got a couple of podcasts on the docket, and going to be doing another live episode tomorrow night of Sons of Liberty. There's been a lot of people that have been really looking forward to that, asking me when it was going to be on again, and but going to be doing that. And next week I head just south of North Carolina, just to the south. Going to be teaching a class down there. Rolling right into April. Got a lot lined up in April. But the big focus for me is getting this next book kicked out. And then I've got a couple more on the docket. The Signals Intelligence book, which is pretty far behind my own expectations, but I want it to be perfect because I'm a eternal perfectionist. But going to be working on all that, spending time with the fam, and living the good life when I can.
Spring has sprung, I take it, in North Carolina?
Getting there. We're kind of having this bipolar spring right now, where it's like it's spring for a few days, and then we'll get a few days like we here we had. I think the low the past couple of nights has been right around 30, 31, and right around freezing. So yeah, we're just it's that time of the year, but starting to warm up, and by the end of the week it's going to be nice and good
I was
cigar.
camping down by your house in my summer sleeping bag. So come on, man.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. That was a weird thing, because when you were down here, normally that's how this winter has been very odd. That we had our deep freeze 2 weeks early, then it warmed up, then it stayed warm for a while, then it got cold again, which is completely out of the ordinary. Then when you came down for the scout course, which is normally very cold, normally, because that week in February here is normally pretty bitter, and it was weird. It was like springtime, and all the trees were blooming, which was just crazy to see. I mean, that's a month early for here, and then all of a sudden, as soon as you left, turned cold again. So I don't
bring
know.
the sunshine. What can I say?
Hey, you do. So it's and you know what? I'm good with it. If the winter goes away, stays away, we get an early spring. It's beautiful outside. It stays that way. Hey, man, I would rather be outdoors all day, every day, than cooped up inside, huddled around a fire. I'd rather be outdoors. I'm an outdoors guy. I can write books from the comfort of a hammock, looking up at a bunch of North Carolina yellow pines, and doing good stuff, man.
Well, with that, we're going to segue to Mr. Scott J87's question for Mike. I take it because I don't think anybody else can speak for the Warlock, and that is, does the Warlock do any tactical spooning?
The Warlock does nothing tactical. It's all strategic. So if there's any spooning that's being done, it's strategic spooning, which is entirely different. That's okay.
That's trade craft.
Yeah, tactical spooning is right out. Sorry.
I love that statement. I love that statement.
And Rick, thank you. I will drive safe.
Do nothing tactical. I do everything strategic. Love that.
Watcher, what's up with you? How's the prep going? I know you're busy sort of fitting out your space for your new endeavor. Is that going the way you want it to, or we lost him? Must have.
He frequently is muted and doesn't know it.
Yes. Yeah, I often have that problem. I'm very famous.
Is that Dolio disease?
It's contagious.
Doleitis. Yeah. Doing good. Had to drive to another state to go pick up to be a buzzard and pick off the corpse of a dying company, but it saved me a good couple bucks, I'll have to say. And yeah, I mean everything's going all right, other than again, just forging out a new business while the banking sector's collapsing. That's all. It should be entertaining one way or the other.
Well, best of luck with it. I'm sure you'll do fine. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for spending 2 hours and 15 minutes, or the better part of that, with us. I hope you took away some knowledge that you otherwise wouldn't have, as it relates to this meeting in Moscow, and what its implications are going to be. And we'll be back next week with a whole different topic. We look like we're going to do our quantum computing episode 3 weeks from today. So that's the week of the 10th of April, and be the 12th, I guess. of of April, and you'll hear a lot about that as we get closer, because I think you're not going to understand the future unless you understand what the realm of the possible is from a computing perspective and technology, and what that drives in the way of all sorts of derivative sort of activities that may or may not impact your life in ways that you may or may not like. I think that's still an open question as it relates to this, and I'm rapidly heading in the direction of becoming a Luddite by choice, because I'm a little concerned about the nature of the society that gets built on top of all these things, and China is a little bit of a prelude to that in the context of some of the loss of freedom, and I'm very, very concerned about that. So it'll be an interesting conversation with people who do this for a living, whose first customer is a three-letter agency that starts with an N, ends with an A, and so it'll be, I think it should give you some things to think about. If you love the Patriot Act, you'll love this. That's my view, but we'll talk about that when we get there. Everybody have a great evening. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. And we will be doing, I think we've decided, on a go forward basis, starting in April, there will be one episode per month that is Open Line Wednesday, for lack of a better description. We sort of road tested the ability to bring people in and have them participate on the show, much as we do, in actually being on, and I thought that was interesting, and I think it has potential. I'd like your thoughts in the chat or DM or however you want to do it. But I think that's a way to really sort of draw the audience closer, and to speak directly to what the audience wants to talk about. It is Rush Limbaugh rules. We don't have to care about it on those days. If it matters to you, it matters to us, and we'll go from there. So stay tuned on that. Thank you, and we'll see you again next week. Have a good evening.